Welcome to SEC Sports Talk with John McCann, and we're back again after another great weekend of college football. Interesting games in the SEC. The highlight of the weekend was Ole Miss versus Auburn. I think that was pretty evident. One of the great games you'll ever see. Two teams fighting it out, 3 versus 4. One had to win, one had to lose. That's just the way it was. Also, Will Muschamp, Florida head coach, keeps his job. He takes Georgia to the woodshed. Somehow. Nobody saw that coming. Yeah, maybe some people did. UT also gets a big win over South Carolina. On the road. Big comeback win for UT. We'll talk about all that later. But also, what does this all mean for the playoff picture? The inaugural season for the college football playoff. What does this all mean? Where is it stacking up? Where are all the teams going to end up? We'll talk about that. And also, Aaron Daniel will join us later. He is a sports radio producer in Birmingham. He has worked with 97.3 The Zone, a station that used to exist. Now he works with Jocks, the station that currently exists. He'll be joining us not too far off from now. We'll start off with Ole Miss and Auburn. That, I'm not going to lie, that was one of the most heartbreaking losses I've ever been through as a fan. Both teams fought their guts out. There's no doubt about that. Nick Marshall made some great plays to keep Auburn in the game. Ole Miss, however, was going for the game-winning drive. Laquan Treadwell, the story of the week. Laquan Treadwell, Ole Miss wide receiver, catches the ball about the 10-yard line, and he's running towards the end zone and gets caught from behind at about the 1-foot line. Originally ruled a touchdown, but as he is pulled down, he breaks his leg. There's a fracture in his leg. He landed wrong, and he also dislocated his ankle. And replay showed as the injury occurred that before the ball crossed the plane, Laquan Treadwell fumbled the ball, which anybody would have done if they were in that kind of agonizing pain. Auburn got the big break, and they won the game. Simple as that. It was an unlucky play for Ole Miss, a lucky play for Auburn, and it was very, very heartbreaking for Laquan Treadwell. He is out for the year. He's out for 4 months. They think he might be able to come back at spring practice of next year, but he will not return this year. And I think it was pretty obvious. He was carted off the field. But just a heartbreaking way to lose a game. And honestly, if you're Auburn, not a lot of people felt great about it. It's one of those you kind of take your win and you leave and you don't really say anything about it. But, you know, that's the way, that's football. It's a gruesome game, or it can be. And injuries like that happen. No, it was not an illegal hit. It was not a horse collar. Some people are trying to make it out that it was a horse collar. It wasn't. No, it was just a freak play, and sometimes that kind of thing happens. Nothing illegal about the play. Give Auburn some credit. They did get down there to make the tackle. But believe me, nobody wanted to see the game end like that. But to Auburn's credit, here's the deal. Let's talk about the game a little bit. The game itself was one of the best you'll ever see. Nick Marshall made some incredible plays. Just unbelievable plays. He got away. I go back to the 3rd and 11 with Auburn deep in their own territory, and they're down by 10. And Robert Kimdichie, he's got his arms wrapped around Nick Marshall, and Marshall escapes. And then he finds Duke Williams down the field wide open, defensive back tripped. I think it was Duke Williams. It was either Duke Williams or Sammy Coates. But going back to that play, I feel like that was the game-defining play. If Kim Dichie makes that sack, the game may be over. This is pretty early in the third quarter. But all the momentum was on Ole Miss's side. And Auburn, down to a third down play, has to make something happen. And they do. You got to give credit to Marshall. Marshall had a great game. But it was a shootout. Auburn, 35 points, Ole Miss with 31. Auburn had 502 yards total. Ole Miss had 487. Bo Wallace had a great game, passing for 341 yards to Auburn's 254. Ole Miss was not able to run the ball. Auburn was able to run the ball very, very well. They ran for almost 250 yards, 248 to be exact. Ole Miss only ran it for 146. Auburn showed up. They were sloppy. They were really sloppy. 13 penalties for 145 yards. There were a couple plays where they had 12 men on the field and didn't even get called. So that's 14 or 15 right there. But Cameron Artis-Payne, he was the big difference in the game for Auburn. 27 carries for 138 yards. Yeah, Marshall went 10 for 50. Pretty decent. But Ole Miss, here's the thing about Ole Miss. They just don't have a very good running game. They can get extremely hot on the pass, but they just haven't been able to establish a solid running game, especially up the middle. They can't do it between the tackles. And here's the thing, you wonder what happens to Ole Miss after losing Laquan Treadwell. Now, I think that they'll be fine. You've got Cody Core, who'll be taking over his spot. Cody Core's been impressive all season. Vince Sanders will be the number one receiver for the rest of the year. He's always been underrated. He's a great receiver. And then you got Quincy Adebojo. I mean, they've got incredible depth at the receiving position. Markel Pack will have to step up. But, my question about going back to Auburn, what does this mean for Auburn's defense? They really struggled against South Carolina last weekend. Can Auburn finish out the season with one loss and win the division? They've still got to go to Georgia and Alabama. I just don't know if they win. I don't know if they win one of those games. I mean, I know Georgia lost to Florida, and that was an embarrassing loss for Georgia. But the Auburn-Georgia game's always close, and it's going to be in Athens. Here's the thing about Auburn's offense. It's impossible to stop. It really is. And they ran all over Ole Miss, and Ole Miss has had a great defense all year long. But Auburn's defense is a little bit suspect. They're hard to figure out. And their defensive line's great, but their secondary can't stop anybody. Again, South Carolina just had their way with them last weekend. It was awful. But Auburn's offense is so good that it might be able to carry them to the playoff. But they've got an incredibly tough road ahead of them in order to do that. They've got to beat Georgia and Alabama. There's a small chance that they could lose one of those games, especially if it's to Georgia. They could still get in. It's a very small chance, though. They pretty much have to win out. That's the nature of the Western Division. There's a chance that nobody's going to get into the 4-team playoff from the SEC because they're all knocking each other off. They're cannibalizing each other. It's ridiculous. I mean, honestly, they're all so good that they might just be too good for the 4-team playoff. I think they should hold the national championship in Atlanta. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe just crown the Western Division champion, if there is a clear champion. Good gosh, it's all a mess. Or it might be a mess. I don't know. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Aaron Daniel will join us in just a few minutes. First, let's do some SEC scores of the week. All right, well, let's start off with Texas A&M and Louisiana Monroe. Texas A&M really struggled with La Monroe. 21-16 was the final score. A&M gets the victory. Kenny Hill suspended for 2 games for violating team rules. Kyle Allen took over. He had a decent game. Made a few good passes. Overall, not too impressive though. 13 of 28, 106 yards. Yeah, I say that's not too impressive. It really wasn't great at all. But A&M does get the victory. They're 6-3 and they're going to a bowl. Georgia and Florida. This was a big-time surprise for a lot of people. Florida, 38-20 over Georgia in Jacksonville. Will Muschamp saves his job. Georgia absolutely blasted on the ground. Florida had 418 yards rushing. Only 27 yards passing, though. Yeah. They didn't need anything else. Why not? Why do they need to pass? Missouri at home takes the win over Kentucky 20-10. Missouri is 7-2. They're also in the lead for the Eastern Division. Kentucky 5-4. Still trying to eke out that 6th win to get to a bowl game. Auburn went into Oxford and took down Ole Miss 35-31. We've already talked about that. Vanderbilt hosts Old Dominion. Vanderbilt gets the win 42-28, but not without a struggle. Arkansas goes into Starkville and gives Mississippi State, the number 1 team in the nation, a big-time scare. Arkansas was up as much as 10-0 in the second quarter. However, Mississippi State comes away with the 17-10 win. Dak Prescott works his magic. Hobbled around a little bit. Seemed a little bit hurt. But did what they needed to do to get the job done. Arkansas still winless in the SEC. Haven't won an SEC game in 2 years. Tennessee shocks South Carolina in Columbia. Tennessee was down as much as 2 touchdowns with 1:50 to go in the game. At that point in time, Tennessee cut it to 7. However, they weren't able to get the onside kick, but they were able to get the ball back later anyway. They had all 3 timeouts. Joshua Dobbs led them down the field, threw the game-tying touchdown with 18 seconds left, went to overtime, kicked a field goal, and stopped South Carolina. Tennessee gets a big win for their program. Tennessee 4-5. South Carolina also 4-5. Tennessee has the potential to win out. They play Missouri, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. All winnable games. Especially Vanderbilt. They'll beat Vanderbilt. Potential to go 7-5. That would be huge for this volunteer program. On the other side, Steve Spurrier wouldn't even take questions after the game. Very disheartening loss for South Carolina. For a team that started out ranked in the top 10 at the beginning of the season. What a bad loss. What a bad way to lose at home. Those are your SEC scores of the week. Aaron Daniel joining us now. He is a sports radio producer, and he's all over Birmingham, including the Big Daddy Jocks. Aaron, welcome to the show. Aaron, what did you make of Auburn's win yesterday in Oxford, Mississippi?
I thought, how many times can Auburn pull away with something as fortunate as they've been the last 2 years to pull with something as a broken leg from a star player. But honestly, you roll into Oxford, Mississippi, a place where Alabama could not go into and win this season, and you get a big victory over quality Ole Miss team, especially the number one scoring defense in the entire country. You put 35 up on them. I think Auburn certainly show why they're the number 3 team in the playoff scenario right now.
When the playoff committee comes out on Tuesday night and they re-rank the teams, where do you think they put Auburn in the college football playoffs?
I think they're still number 3, and the only reason I imagine that you're going to put Power 5 conference unbeatens at the top with Mississippi State and Florida State. I know Florida State survived a scare, but it's still a win on the road against Louisville, against a top-ranked defense. So I think at the end of the day, they'll still rank Florida State number 2 behind Mississippi State, and then put Auburn at that number 3 position.
Ole Miss suffered a tough loss the other night. Not only did they lose the game, on the very same play they lost their top receiver, Laquan Treadwell. Where does this Ole Miss team go after such a heartbreaking loss in your mind?
It's interesting to say. It's not quite the 05 Alabama situation that you had with Tyrone Prothro, which very, very oddly similar in some circumstances when you look at a top defense, star receiver goes down with a leg injury. But the difference between that Alabama team and this Ole Miss team is the level of talent around the offense on Ole Miss is good enough to keep itself afloat, especially when you look at the fact that their remaining schedule includes Presbyterian at home, a road game against Arkansas, who's still looking for an SEC victory of any kind in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah,
and then a home date. Very fortunate to get a home date against Mississippi State, who, if coming in unbeaten, will be an uncharted territory, being a number 1 team in the Egg Bowl, and having to try to defend that possibly. Maybe looking ahead to Atlanta. I doubt they'll look at past Ole Miss, but maybe seeing that college football playoff in their minds.
If they beat Alabama.
Yeah, if they beat Alabama, which is very possible. Mississippi State has a very good team, but it's all what if. But I'm just for this scenario, if Ole Miss has Mississippi State rolling number 1, I think obviously it's their toughest test remaining, but it's their only test remaining. So I expect them to get at least 2 more victories, and then it's a rivalry game, so anything could possibly happen. They will finish 9-3, but could conceivably finish 10-2.
Speaking of rivalries, between Auburn and Alabama now, especially after watching Auburn this weekend, which one of these teams, in your mind, do you think wins the Iron Bowl?
Wow, putting me on the spot with that already. Because we still haven't seen enough from Alabama yet, to be honest. We've seen a lot from Auburn. Has had a much more difficult schedule going through so far. Both teams had quality non-conference victories over Big 12 teams. Auburn taking down Kansas State and Alabama taking down West Virginia. Who knew West Virginia would be as good as they are this season, to be quite honest. But going on what you've seen so far, I think you still have to pick Auburn, and the only reason is I think their offense is able to mask their defensive flaws. But with it being in Tuscaloosa, it makes it so much more difficult to pick Auburn. I still have to see what Alabama. The problem with Alabama is, aside from West Virginia, the only other quality win that you could call it that is Texas A&M, and the only reason that's the case is because they rolled up on A&M 59-0. But A&M's really, not much. It hasn't done very much this season. They beat a pedestrian South Carolina team this year, as we come to find out. The only redeeming thing about Texas A&M is their number 20 scoring offense. I think Bama's best wins against West Virginia because it's a West Virginia team that beat a Maryland team that's already bowl eligible at 6-3, and their West Virginia's 2 losses, other two losses are to Oklahoma and at TCU, which are quality opponents. But with Alabama, their biggest test so far was at Ole Miss, and they failed. So I think we still have to see them to get, LSU coming up, and then you have Mississippi State, and then you get some downtime against Western Carolina, and then you get Auburn. So obviously the meat of Alabama's schedule is still to come up. So we're going to find out going into the Iron Bowl more about Alabama before we can really make a prediction. So if you're solely asking me based on right now, I'm still picking Auburn, especially after getting a victory like this over the Rebels.
Well, and let me ask you this too. Does the win over, I mean, obviously scoring 59 points against Texas A&M was not that impressive because A&M's defense, let's just be real, it's awful. But was holding them to nothing, to 0 points, was that impressive, and would that give Bama hope to think that they can stop Auburn's offense?
Well, that's what makes it a quality win to begin with. The only reason that A&M victory is even considered a quality win, in my personal opinion, is because it's the 20th ranked scoring offense, and it probably would be top 15 if not for the shutout in Tuscaloosa. So a 59-0 scoreline is going to make that a quality win against a 3-loss team. But I don't think so, no, because A&M runs something completely different from what Auburn does. A&M is more spread out air raid type attack, and they had a quarterback in Kenny Hill who didn't play yesterday, obviously, who's out for 2 games. But they have a quarterback who's more pocket savvy and likes to do what Kevin Sumlin enjoyed doing at Houston with guys like Case Keenum. So it's more of an air raid attack that we've come accustomed to seeing from guys like Mike Leach and so forth. The biggest difference in the last 2 years from A&M was because they had a guy like Johnny Manziel who could beat you with his legs, and was much more like a Cam Newton, if you want to compare Auburn teams. With Auburn, it's a read option offense. It's a triple option offense. It's the classic triple option, except it's taken into a spread format. Basically, that's really all it is. It's just the evolution of the triple option and the read option, and so it's completely different. And Auburn has so many things in their playbook that they probably have not pulled out yet. They're just saving for Alabama. That it's impossible to prepare for them and expect that just because you rolled up on a spread team like A&M that you can just do the same thing to Auburn. I imagine Auburn's going to be very unpredictable, just like they were last year. That was part of the reason why Bama was not able to put them away late in the first place. They had a lead late on Auburn in last year's game in Jordan-Hare, and Auburn was able to use some plays that took Alabama's defensive backs off guard and found the end zone. So I don't think that they're anywhere near prepared for that type of offense.
Going over to the number 1 team in the nation, how impressed or maybe unimpressed were you with Mississippi State 17-10 win over Arkansas?
Well, I mean, if you're going to compare it, it's at home, which is not good considering how close it was. At least when we were talking about a team like we were talking about Alabama, then at least with Alabama, it was in Fayetteville, so it's a hostile road environment. When you're Mississippi State and it's your first home game as a number 1 in the history of your program, you have to perform much better than what you did that night. I know Dak Prescott's hobbling. I know he had a boot on his leg before the game and then took it off, but to throw 2 picks, not looking like the Heisman player he had Heisman quality player he had looked during the season. Josh Robinson gets held to 64 yards on 19 carries. Prescott's passing is eventually what won them the game. And credit Mississippi State's defense. Mississippi State's defense is what is the thing that won it overall, holding Arkansas to 10 and having the goal line stand. Which, by the way, I've lost count on the number of goal line stands that defense has had. I think Mississippi State's whole defense should win an MVP award this year if they continue this. I'm not very impressed. They're still a number 1 team for a reason, because of the quality victories they do have and the fact they still have so much talent. But they're going to have to shape up going forward. They still, like we talked about, they still have to go into Tuscaloosa and have to go into Oxford. So this is not a guarantee for them. It is far from a guarantee. And if you get by those, you still have to go to Atlanta and either take on a what we saw last year and this year so far is a tough to knock down and keep out Missouri team, or a Georgia team that we really just can't figure out at this point.
Aaron, how dependent is Mississippi State on Dak Prescott?
Highly dependent. I think they're extremely dependent on Dak Prescott. When you're talking about the quarterback position, as important as it is, it's the most important position in football and maybe one of the most important positions in all of sports, behind maybe an ace pitcher or just a starting pitcher in baseball or a goalie in hockey. I think that the quarterback position, it obviously it's the guy that's touching the ball every down, most every down, unless you're running with a wildcat. But a guy like Dak Prescott is an extremely talented player. He is a seasoned veteran who's coming to his own. When you go back and look at these past Auburn teams to compare, you go back and look at Nick Marshall last year and Cam Newton in 2010. Both those guys were just getting started, and they weren't quite integrated into the offense, and it took them about 3 or 4 games to really start to get things rolling. And once they did, everything fell into place, and it was a well-oiled machine. With Prescott, he's been around for a little while, so like I said, he is a seasoned veteran, and the offense is much smoother with him and has been since the beginning of the season, and you've seen that throughout, except for perhaps last night with a hobbled Prescott. And you see what happens with an injured Dak Prescott. He's not quite as effective and can almost cost your team. But I don't expect a guy like Damian Williams to come off the bench and replace Dak Prescott and give the same production. I don't expect a running back like Josh Robinson to make up for the running that you lose from Dak Prescott. So it's extremely bad if Dak Prescott further injures himself to where he is not able to go. There's no way they're getting out of Tuscaloosa or Oxford, Mississippi without getting at least one loss.
Gosh, just imagine if Cam Newton had finished his career at Auburn. But let me ask you this, switching gears over to the Florida-Georgia game, how surprised were you that Florida manhandled Georgia the way they did yesterday?
Surprise is a good word to use, but at the same time, I went back and looked at the numbers from their games this season, and really go back and look at them, John, and you go back and look at their wins, and then go look at the losses, and you see the difference in how they got to where they got with their wins and how they got to losing those certain games like Missouri. And then winning against Tennessee. The big thing with their wins were that they gave Matt Jones normally at least 24, 25 carries. And in a lot of those victories, they'd also give Kelvin Taylor quite a few carries as well, and they would rack up yardage. It's the running game that's been their bread and butter since Will Muschamp got there. It wasn't quite as effective as last year. They had not found their running identity, and then they bring Kurt Roper, offensive coordinator, and he just completely switches how the offense goes about it. Becomes more Jeff Driscoll oriented and takes away from the running backs, and it really has hurt them this season. I'm just not. Obviously nobody's been impressed with Florida. You have to be impressed yesterday, but this is their identity. They should have been doing this all season, where you give Matt Jones at least 25 carries, and in the case of yesterday, they give both Jones and Kelvin a combined 50 carries. And look what happens. They only passed the ball 6 times the entire day, and they win by 18 points. I think Florida finally found themselves, and obviously the emotion had to be a part of it, not wanting to lose their coach immediately. We know the history of Florida coaches after Georgia games. This is exactly how Ron Zook was let go after a Georgia game. So I'm sure the players were weary of the instability. So I imagine that had a huge part in it. But we know Florida's a good running team. You go back to their season they made the Sugar Bowl, they ran wild all over people. And that's just their identity. It's what they need to get back to and stop trying to make the offensive passing game, because it's really just not what Florida is right now. It's not the Urban Meyer system, and even Urban was very good at running the football, just being able to mix in good passing. But even Urban wanted to run the football, and this team is built to run, and it's obvious evidence when you watch a game like yesterday.
What does Will Muschamp have to do to keep his job?
Win.
What does he have to do?
I mean, he has to win. He has to win. He's 4-3 right there. If they're 4-3, they obviously had their Idaho game canceled, so they'd probably be 5-3 right now if they'd actually played that. You got 4 games left. You're going to beat Eastern Kentucky to get your 5th victory. That leaves Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Florida State.
Does it have to beat Florida State?
No, I'm not going to go that far because it's such a talented team and it's on the road. I don't think it should be an expectation. He probably needs to just go win these next 3 games at Vanderbilt, at home against South Carolina, and at home against Eastern Kentucky. If he loses a second straight year to a team, like he lost to Georgia Southern last year, if he loses to Eastern Kentucky again, it's a done deal. It's over. If he loses to both Vanderbilt and South Carolina, I think it's a done deal. But I think if he can at least win one of those 2, probably South Carolina and Eastern Kentucky, and at least make sure they get to a bowl game, I think maybe his rope is a little bit longer. So I give him a fighting chance, but I think to be absolutely certain he's back next year, he's got to win the next 3.
Well, I don't think Hoover High School could lose to Vanderbilt, so I think he'll be okay in that game.
Well, there are still a few colleges that have lost to Vanderbilt, so it's not.
Well, that's true. I think Vanderbilt won this weekend. What was it, 35-21 over Old Dominion?
Old Dominion, I think, 35 or 42, I believe.
Oh, is that it? Okay, I didn't even turn it on.
Yeah, 42-28.
Okay. So it was a 2-touchdown game. I think Old Dominion should fire their coach. Let me ask you this: going to UT's big win yesterday, how big of a win is that for that program, especially going on the road against South Carolina? Even though South Carolina is not as good as they were projected to be, but what does that do for Butch Jones and the UT program right now?
Oh, it's a huge shot in the arm, but I mean, it's their second straight victory over South Carolina, so it's nothing new. What they have to be able to do is get wins over Florida, Georgia, eventually, at least, and they compete with Alabama. They were able to fight back into that game, but they have to be able to compete with Alabama through 4 whole quarters, and then get big non-conference victories. Getting a win over Oklahoma would have been nice earlier this season, but it's a start. When you look at Tennessee's remaining schedule, you get at home against Kentucky, at home against Missouri, and on the road against Vanderbilt. I think all 3 of those games are extremely winnable. I think hopefully they've found their quarterback in Josh Dobbs. I've liked this kid since last year, and I don't know why, to be honest, why they pulled him for Justin Worley to begin with.
I don't either.
I think Dobbs is a phenomenal talent that gives you such a dual threat that it's hard to take him out of this. And after what he did against Alabama when he came in, and after what he did against South Carolina to get that victory, help get that victory for them, I think he's pretty much just secured himself the starting job going forward. Tennessee's recruiting has been really good since Butch came in. So I imagine that Tennessee's heading in the right direction. I imagine by next year maybe an 8-win season, maybe 9 victories, and it just keeps growing. Because knowing Butch and having watched his coaching career at Central Michigan and then at Cincinnati, usually he just goes nowhere but up. I mean, this is a guy who took Cincinnati to a BCS bowl game. So you have to look at Tennessee's prospects and like them a good bit.
Well, Aaron, great stuff. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I hope to do it again sometime.
That was Aaron Daniel, sports radio producer in Birmingham. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Will Muschamp saves his job. Had he lost to Georgia this weekend, he was gone. Period. I mean, there's no getting around it. He was packing his bags and gone. Yeah. Maybe they let him finish out the season. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, he had to beat Georgia. There's just no getting around it. And the turning point in the game was in the first quarter. Georgia was up 7-0. They scored the game's first touchdown, and it looked like, Georgia was just going to run away with this. No big deal. Florida's terrible. Georgia's on the way to an SEC Eastern Division championship. No biggie. And then Florida drives down the field, and they run a fake field goal. And the holder, he runs in for a touchdown. Yeah, forget the first down. Just go in for 6. That doesn't make you look very good on defense, does it? When the holder runs in for a touchdown on you? Yeah, that's kind of embarrassing. But, that was the turning point in the game. And Florida never looked back. They got up 31-7. No joke. I mean, you believe me if you watch the game. But yeah, if you didn't, I'm not making this up. The funny thing is, Florida only passed for 27 yards. Trayon Harris, 3 for 6. Yeah, that's 9 yards completion. That ought to tell you that Florida found some big flaw in Georgia's run defense because they gave up 418 yards on the ground. That's awful, especially considering the fact that you're playing a team that's had no success on offense all year long. I mean, just none. But here's the thing about Georgia. You never know what you're going to get out of them. And no matter how good they are, they have that one game, or in this case, 2 games, that will keep them out of the national championship. Florida's just dashed their championship hopes. And now Georgia may not win the East. I mean, Missouri's on track to win the East. A very mediocre Missouri team is on track to win the Eastern Division. But that's the thing about Georgia. They just can't get over the hump. When the expectations are there, they just can't ever meet them. And they're always good. Don't get me wrong. They're not a terrible team. They're not a bad team. I mean, most teams out there would kill to be in Georgia's position. But there's 2 things that they do every year, or one of 2 things that they do every year, that shows me that they're just not a championship caliber team, at least in the SEC. They either can't win the big game, or they do win the big game, and then they slip on the banana peel. That is the Florida Gators or South Carolina. Man, these are 2 bad losses on Georgia's schedule. And I think they've still got a legitimate shot to beat Auburn. And watch them. They'll beat Auburn, and then they won't be able to get into the playoff because they lost to South Carolina and they lost to Florida. They're just not a championship caliber team. They're close, but they just can't quite get there. Now, the question is, what does this mean for Will Muschamp, head coach of Florida? Well, he's won his toughest game. I think he has to win out except for Florida State. They play at Florida State, the number 2 team in the nation. Even though it's a rivalry game, I don't think they expect him to win that game, honestly. But he has to win the other 3 games on his schedule, and that includes Vanderbilt on the road. That's next weekend. They'll win that game. They'll beat South Carolina, I think, at home, and then they play Eastern Kentucky. Now, I don't think they'll lose to Eastern Kentucky, but let's not forget they lost to Georgia Southern last year at home. But, I think this is a different team. They've already won 4 games. That's as many as they won last year. So they're definitely better. Is it enough to keep Muschamp at Florida? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's talk about the playoff. I mean, Does it really get any more interesting than this? You got what? 3 teams that were in the playoff from the SEC. Ole Miss is out. Probably for good. Florida State's number 2. Auburn was at number 3. Oh, and I skipped number 1, Mississippi State. But here's the deal. Who will take Ole Miss's place? I don't think anything changes. I don't think it should change. Maybe Auburn goes to number 2. But in the top 3, don't think anything should move. Mississippi State should stay at number 1. They did beat Auburn. Florida State, still undefeated. Their wins are not as impressive as Mississippi State's or Auburn's. However, they are undefeated. Auburn with 1 loss. You can make the argument that maybe Auburn should pass Florida State, even with a loss, and go to number 2. But the real question is, who will take over the number 4 spot? Well, Oregon comes in at number 5, Alabama at number 6, TCU at number 7. TCU beats West Virginia, who, by the way, is a quality opponent. West Virginia, going into the weekend, was ranked number 20 in the college football playoff rankings. They will drop after that. But West Virginia is a good road win. One of West Virginia's losses was to Alabama. And they played him pretty well, too. But I think you got to put Oregon at number 4. If you're me, I'm going Oregon at number 4. Oregon gets a win over Stanford, 45-16. Absolutely obliterated them. Stanford's not that great. They have been in the years past, but this year they're struggling. Everybody's wondering, why is Alabama not going to be in? Oh, my goodness. I mean, we'll find out what happens tomorrow, but Alabama didn't even play this weekend. They're not going to get in over Oregon. Not at this point. Oregon's already ahead of them. Oregon's number 5, Bama's number 6. Yeah, Bama's not jumping Oregon for not playing, especially considering the fact that Oregon whipped their opponent. Not going to happen. But here's the thing. All Alabama has to do is win out. If Alabama wins out, they're in. It's that simple. They've got an opportunity to beat Mississippi State, the number 1 team, and they've got that at home. And then they play Auburn, who is not so bad themselves. Not too shabby. Auburn may be the number 2 team after this weekend. So, Alabama, don't worry about these rankings are worthless. They're just trying to give you a picture of what they think is gonna happen. That it doesn't mean anything. They're just trying to get people riled up, complaining and talking about it. They just want more TV time. That's all they want. They don't care if you agree with them, because ultimately they know these rankings don't matter. Mississippi State and Auburn and Alabama are not going to be in the playoff together because they all play each other. I mean, honestly, there's no way it can happen like that. Florida State, they're probably secure. They don't play anybody for the rest of the year. Their biggest chance to lose was Thursday night at Louisville. And Louisville couldn't get the job done. So, they're in. But Mississippi State, they still have to play Alabama on the road and Ole Miss on the road. 1, maybe 2 losses right there. Auburn still has to go on the road to Georgia and Alabama. And, well, Alabama, they've got to play Auburn and Mississippi State. They're all going to beat each other. So, these rankings don't matter. Yeah, look, you'd much rather be in on December 7th than be in right now. I mean, look, don't get all upset. Oh, man, they're ripping us off. They're screwing us over. No, look, here's the deal. There's going to be 1 SEC team in there. All this talk about 2 It's not going to happen. Hopefully, there'll just be one. I mean, hopefully they can even get one. The SEC's just cannibalizing each other, especially in the West. Then you got the championship game. You haven't even thought about that. I mean, it's not like the Eastern Division is something to write home about, but still, that's another game they have to play. Let's talk about the Mississippi State-Arkansas game for a second. Arkansas is definitely getting better, but that was not a number one team in the nation performance that Mississippi State gave the other day. They found a way to win, and maybe you could say it's a trap game. But let's be real here. Arkansas had Mississippi State on its heels. And Arkansas was driving down to tie the game, and they threw an interception. So what does that say? Mississippi State cannot play like this in 2 weeks against Alabama. They will lose if they play like that. Again, maybe it was an off game. Dak Prescott's limping around a little bit, not full strength. And he had a pretty good game. He threw for 331 yards. But honestly, Mississippi State's red zone defense is great. But Arkansas, they're playing a lot better football, and they're gradually getting better. But that's a team that you've got to handle, and you've got to handle them well. And, it's a W. It's a win. Mississippi State, they got out of there alive. They'll play UT Martin next week. That'll be an easy win for them. But they've got to go into Tuscaloosa, and that's the game that matters, at least up until the Egg Bowl. So, can they afford to play like that? Heck no. However, they will remain the number one team in the nation after this week. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Tell you what, what an ending to the Tennessee-South Carolina game. I'm kind of sitting there after the Auburn game, and I'm still kind of stunned. And I look up, Tennessee's down by a couple touchdowns. I'm like, this game's over. Tennessee gave it a nice shot. Held in there. Hung in there for a while. But this game's over. Joshua Dobbs, he brings him back. Really, really impressive. Really impressive. And there's 1:50 to go in the game, and Tennessee scored to go behind 7 at this point. They kick the onside kick. South Carolina recovers. And that's it. But the thing was, Tennessee had 3 timeouts. So it wasn't like the game was completely over. And sure enough, they stopped him. Dobbs went down the field. And with 18 seconds to go in the game, tied it up. And then in overtime, they kick the field goal. Tennessee goes ahead by 3. And so you're thinking, well, you never like to get 3. You always want to get 7 if you get the ball first, because you always have that feeling that, well, the other team will tie you with a field goal. You're kicking a field goal to not lose, because the other team's going to probably kick a field goal, and they'll send you to second overtime. But Tennessee's defense, I think they had 3 sacks in a row, and so the guy comes out and he's kicking a 58-yarder, and it wasn't even close. So Tennessee got their upset win. And that's huge for Tennessee. That's absolutely huge. And, they had ridiculous amounts of yardage, both sides. It was absolutely ridiculous. I didn't watch the whole game. But when you look at the stats here, it's just insane. 645 total yards for the Volunteers, 625 for South Carolina. Passing 301 yards for Tennessee, 377 for South Carolina. Rushing 344 yards for Tennessee to 248 for South Carolina. Joshua Dobbs, look at this. On the ground, he went 24 carries for 166 yards. And Jalen Hurd went 21 for 125. I mean, absolutely. Joshua Dobbs, he is the real deal. And you got to wonder why they didn't start him at the beginning of the season. And I think they were trying to redshirt him. And that makes sense. Butch Jones came into the season thinking, we're not going to be that great this year. Building for the future. Let's redshirt Joshua Dobbs. However, Justin Worley gets hurt in the Ole Miss game. And what are you going to do? Play Nathan Peterman? I mean, honestly, that ain't going to work. So, Tennessee's got hope here. They'll lose a year out of Dobbs because they played him this year. But at the same time, when you look at his stats, he went 23 of 40 passing for 301 yards. And then ran for 166 on top of that. That's incredible. So, if you're Tennessee, you're very encouraged, and Tennessee can win out. You don't think they can beat Missouri at home? I'm telling you, Missouri's in the driver's seat right now to win the East, but Missouri's not that good. They're really not. Let's not forget, Georgia beat them 34-0 at Missouri. And that 42-13 win that they had over Florida, that was a fluke. Yeah, they had 120 yards total against Florida that day. Don't let the score fool you. That was special teams and defense. Really more bad offense for Florida. Tennessee's, I think they're going to win out. They're going to go 7-5. I think they're going to beat Kentucky. They're going to beat Vanderbilt. If Tennessee can go 7-5 this year, that would be huge. That would be monumental for this program. What a huge momentum boost going into next year. They'll be Eastern Division contenders. They'll be contending for the Eastern Division championship. I mean, let's look at it. How good is Georgia going to be? They're going to be they'll have a new quarterback. And then you've got Florida, who's, well, they haven't proved much. Missouri, they're not that great. They don't recruit well either. Kentucky, interestingly enough, they're a team on the rise. But Vanderbilt, they're not any good. So, look, Tennessee's got a shot to win the East next year. Not trying to get too ahead of myself here. But hey, after this game, and I think the most encouraging thing is watching Joshua Dobbs. That's unbelievable. Tennessee's offensive and defensive line will have a lot of experience under their belt. Remember, none of these guys had started before the year. And now, going into next year, they're going, in my mind, they're an Eastern Division favorite. South Carolina, boy, I mean, look at the downturn that they've had this year. They have lost 5 games and will probably lose to Clemson. And they were a top 10 team coming into the season. And they've got to go to Florida. This team may go 5-7. And Spurrier, after the game, Steve Spurrier did not answer questions. He came out, gave a statement, said, "You all watched the game," and left. Things could not have gone worse for South Carolina this year than they have. South Carolina's got one chance to make up for this miserable season that they've had. If they can beat Clemson on the road, Clemson's ranked number 21, maybe that can make up a little bit for this letdown season that they've had. Anyway, let's cover my predictions for the week. I'm picking Georgia to go into Lexington and beat Kentucky 31-20. I think Georgia recovers after the bad loss to Florida. Kentucky, they're going to have to wait a little bit longer to maybe get that 6th win. Ole Miss stays at home against Presbyterian. I think Ole Miss recovers enough to get a 41-7 win. Auburn plays Texas A&M at home. Auburn is significantly better, but I think with the emotional win over Ole Miss, there will be a little bit of a letdown. However, Auburn's offense will not be stopped by Texas A&M's horrible defense. Auburn wins the game 45-35. Mississippi State over UT Martin, 52-0. Florida goes to Vanderbilt. I think Florida, after an emotional win over Georgia, will struggle a little bit, but I think they win 24-10 on the road in Nashville. My upset of the week is LSU over Alabama in Baton Rouge. The game is a 6 o'clock game at night. LSU does not lose very often at night. And remember, this is not the same LSU team that we saw a month ago. This team beat Ole Miss at home, and they figured out a running game, and they are hard to stop on the ground. I think LSU wins 24-20 over the Alabama Crimson Tide. That's all the time we have. Thank you all for listening. Remember to go to our page, SEC Sports Talk with John McCann. Like the page, comment, share it with your friends, whatever. Also, you can email me at secsportstalkwithjohn@gmail.com and let me know what you think. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next Monday at 9 o'clock p.m.